All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. And then as folks come in, we can they could just jump in the conversation with us, along with Dr. De Jesus Diaz. So welcome back. We are on week 3 of 4 of our series this year on Deep Equity Now, Rest, Recuperation and Rejuvenation. So far, we have had 2 dynamic sessions, unexpectedly dynamic, just in terms of the conversations and the depth of the conversations. And so definitely looking forward to today, and looking forward to continuing that with our guests today. We have Dr. Bel Reyes, who is with us from Sacramento, California. And we also have Dr. Olga De Jesus Diaz, who is running a little bit late. As we all know, things come up during the day that sometimes has us a little behind, but she'll be joining our conversation in a little bit. Before we move on, I want to hand it over to my partner, Dr. Velma Cobb, so she can give her introductions.
Well, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Velma Cobb, and I am director of the Landers Center at Tour University in New York. And this has been a wonderful series this year. I think just the conversation of sharing and actually sharing not only with the speakers who've been with us, but also our sharing in terms of, rest, rejuvenation, because a lot is going on. And I really like to say, I know that it is one of the things is that we like to push to think that everything is over. But I still say it's not over. Stuff is still going on. So as much as I know, we say the pandemic is over, but I know that people are still having some issues with it, with loved ones, with themselves. There's long COVID. We did go through a period of social unrest, but I can't say that I think that that's over. And so, as we gear up for the social political context of what we expect coming, there's still a lot going on. So I just, say, for me, let's just be real, and stuff is still happening. And yes, we do need to rejuvenate. We need to replenish. We need to take care of ourselves, because obviously we're in this for the long haul.
Yes, we are. I know you like to start us off with a moment of silence.
Yes,
would you like to lead us through that?
Thank you. Yes, just a way of, and I like to use the breath, because the breath is always with us. It is something we don't need any prompts. We don't need anything that we have to go out and buy. The breath is with us. And it's also, for me, it's about life. And so I want to invite you and people in the audience and all of the speakers on the webinar to let's just take a moment, and you can lower your gaze, orientate yourself to the room so that you know that you're safe. And let's just take 3 deep cleansing breaths, breathing in from the abdomen such that you feel it expands, and then releasing as your abdomen contracts. Please go at your own pace. And to set this beloved community in partnership, let's take another deep breath in, and on the exhale, let's give a gentle oral exhalation. Thank you.
All right. Well, let me introduce one of my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Reyes, by starting off with her bio. Dr. Reyes has over a decade of experience working in close partnerships with various community and youth adult partnerships. She brings a host of facilitation skills and leadership in developing community and school partnerships. Dr. Reyes has extensive experience working with community-based organizations to strengthen their capacity to support young leaders, engage boards of directors, administrators, develop and implement strategic plans, design and implement effective leadership, and provide training and fundraising, staff development, program evaluation, and planning. Dr. Reyes was born to immigrant parents in, oh my God,
Guanajuato. Guanajuato, yeah.
Thank you, Mexico, and a mother herself. She values the contributions that culture, language, and identity have on education and community. And let me say, there are a number of people who I feel like I owe my career to, and when I say that, I mean these are folks who had a direct hand in helping me shape who I was going to be as I went into the field of education. I think that's extremely important, is that folks understand their identity, understand what their morals and values are, because when you don't, you can be swayed in directions that you may not want to go into. And so Dr. Reyes has had a tremendous impact on me in that regards. As I say to folks all the time, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. That's been one of the models that she has instilled in me. And so, Dr. Reyes, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate just being able to share space with everyone, opportunity to just share, but also learn. And I have to say, I share in those same sentiments. You're definitely a brother in this work, and just my own beloved family. So thank you, Dr. Ananuju, for having me. And Velma, I appreciate you as well.
Thank you.
Velma, if it's okay, you mind if I ask the first question?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Jump it off. Yes.
I've been moved this week by yet another incident that happened in Nashville, Tennessee. A few more of our babies lost their lives to gun violence. And it really brought this topic into view for me, because it seems like as soon as we get over mourning and grieving from one incident, another one happens. And then when you think about all the different things in terms that we are dealing with on the local level, this idea of where do you find rest? Where do you find replenishment when you're constantly on both the national and local level being bombarded with grief and tragedy and injustice? And so, one, I just wanted to start off by asking Dr. Reyes, like, how have you been doing this week, kind of in light of some of the national and maybe local issues that you are confronted with? And what initially comes to your mind when you think about trying to find rest in the work that we are engaged in?
Thank you for that question, and absolutely just express just our own thoughts and prayers with yet another avoidable, unnecessary incident that occurred in his. I think when we all saw it, is like our babies again, right? These are our young people, but I think that part of just how I come to this work and thinking about your question around how do we find rest. Well, part of it is in continuously being in the space and engaging in those conversations. I think it's important that we engaged in, the things that are impacting us, whether, within our own backyards, at home, locally, those things are impacting us, across the state and nationally, I think is all aligns, at least for me, to the work that I feel like, I've been called to. So, one, I think, is continuously to be in dialogue and conversations with others that, such as yourself, actually, Dr. Ijoma, that I often connect with, and others that really are, that I identify as part of my community, right? Those that are a part of the work that we do, right alongside me, but also to be in conversation with those that are not. But I say that all to say that's part of one of the things that kind of fill me, right? With the continued, when I think of rest, it's a continue filling just, I think, my heart, my spirit, my mind, with those conversations are those critical conversations that we need to be in a space of continuously having with each other, in community, and with those that, maybe not necessarily share in the same kind of mind frame or thought or approach to the work as maybe I do, as we do here, with the work that we do at Innovation Bridge. But it's interesting that you asked the question of rest, because it's almost like counterintuitive. Like I tend to move in the direction more towards the work. And interestingly enough, I find that healing in different ways for me, if that makes sense.
And I think it does. I mean, I know that we come to the work, each one of us, in different spaces, and and there is so much work that needs to be done, and in our respective spaces, we want to always make sure we're in connection, in communication with whoever we're doing it. But I like the point that you brought up, is that yes, you have your beloved community, one in which there is a sense of support and understanding, because it's an ongoing conversation that you have with these group of people. However, it is also one in which you're saying reaching out to people who may not share or have the same experience or share the same thing. And I think that's important, because this is really, like kind of one earth. And so I think that, we are sharing it. And perhaps there are those who don't want to share it, but we're sharing it. And for us to kind of replenish ourselves, it is really having those conversations with people who think like we think, but also people who don't think like we think. And so I think, I like the point that you brought up, that it really is both. Now, I know that, sometimes it's hard when you're into work to think about rest, to think about rejuvenation, to think about replenishment. But I think that that's important, because, we're trying to, number one, support those that we're in kind of the trenches with. But we know people can get tired. We know people, because they've been doing this for years and years sometimes. And then we want to attract others into this space of movement, of action. And so it is this dance that we do around replenishment, around rejuvenation, and was just wondering, as you think about your work and you try to draw people into the space of doing the work that you do, and then support those that you certainly work with in their daily lives and their ups and downs, how do you kind of communicate that kind of replenishment, that kind of rejuvenation of, support and action?
That's a really good question. And I think For us, really, it is a integrated practice, right? I think the work that we're called to do, the work that I'm called to do, has to also include those practices of rest. And it begins with asking, what are those needs of my fellow, colleagues and those that I work with, like checking in on them, asking what does rest mean, like, look like, sound like for them, because it could be completely different than what it means, like, sounds like, and kind of what my individual needs are. So I think a little bit is one, to recognize that the work that we do cannot be absent of that. It's important that it's an integrated practice. I think the other is also asking what we need to continue to pour back in when we're pouring into others, to find those moments of rest, of respite. And so that's something that for us, at least at our organization, on a personal, professional level, it's an integrated practice, meaning that it's ingrained into just our core values. It's ingrained in terms of the design of our physical space. It's integrated in terms of how we kind of think forward for kind of our organizational strategic kind of visioning plan for the year. We're very mindful and intentional to include kind of spirituality practices within that, to ensure that we're being mindful not only of our individual kind of needs and being able to be our best and better selves and how we come to the work and do the work, but to ensure that I'm supporting, right, those that are with me in this work, kind of in solidarity and side by side, that they're also getting what they need to replenish to feel that level of rest. So I think is being intentional, integrating into your practice. I'm not sure that I see it as something separate and apart from just who I am as a person. And we say bring your whole selves when we come to the work, when we come to our organization, and that includes whether that's in spirituality, in faith, or any other kind of practices that just promote individual kind of wellness and well-being.
We get so excited about having these conversations that sometimes we forget to ask the most basic question, but would you mind giving us a quick well, not even a quick, but just telling us, what do you do? What is your work that you are involved in right now? And how does it relate to equity?
You tell me, Dr. Ananuju. We do. I jokingly say that because we work really in close collaboration on a lot of our wonderful projects that we're privileged to be a part of by way of Innovation Bridge. So we're a community-based organization, as you noted earlier, located in Sacramento. And our work really is focused around our core mission of delivering high quality technical assistance support that looks to bridge innovative practices and collaborative partnerships for more just and equitable schools and communities. So that work includes, for example, efforts at a localized countywide effort through the Black Child Legacy Campaign that seeks to reduce preventable African American child deaths across Sacramento County, focused on the 7 most vulnerable, impacted with the highest disparities of preventable African American child deaths in Sacramento County. Our work also includes working closely with school systems, educational school site level districts, and of course, when we think about public education, that conversation absolutely is a conversation about equity, racial equity. So that is another kind of lane of engagement that's part of our work. We work closely with young people. They're the heart and spirit of much of the work that we do. And just me personally, my heart and spirit keep me youthful. Although I think the generational gap, I'm like, why does it continue to widen over these past few years? But all that to say, we do a lot of work through some very specific youth programs with our wonderful school district partners, such as the Youth Advocates youth voice advocates that really focuses on facilitation of listening sessions designed, developed by, with, and for young people to include youth voices in shaping the allocation of resources for young people and families through the local control accountability plan, as we all know, the LCAP in school systems. In addition to that, some of our work focuses around young boys and men of color. So we work really closely with the My Brother's Keeper Sacramento collaborative efforts, as well as others that are focusing on getting young people to and through college, providing kind of strategic planning support. Maybe that's not the best synopsis you're looking for there, Dr. O, but just a little bit of our work. But we kind of identify it as like buckets of areas that we tend to focus on, but they include youth and family engagement, evaluation, assessment, and research, and then of course support around kind of organizational capacity building and development, and then kind of our last kind of bucket areas around just kind of cultural relevant and responsive facilitation, engagement, and learning.
That's a lot of buckets there.
We should probably refine, but that's hard, right? That's not always easy. The work's not always easy. Yeah.
In all that you do, where or what is the area that you are finding the most challenging in regards to equity right now?
I mean, it simply is like just being about it. I think it's so interesting that we often use the word equity, right? And we see it written into mission statements. Now, I appreciate that. It looks good. I think the intention's there. But when I say being about it, then, I think some of the challenges that we have encountered and experienced is what does that look like in practice? And really a shared understanding, a true understanding when we say equity, what does that mean? And I think at times we've encountered that we have that conversation synonymous with, and in fact, I think Dr. O and some of the work that we've collaborated on, we've found that that conversation happens synonymously when we talk about equity with the word equality. And so some of the challenges is to engage folks in the conversation, asking the right questions to kind of push the conversation a bit, to really deconstruct those two. When we talk about equity, we're not talking about equality. Completely two different conversations, two different ways of practice. So part of our work, I think one of the challenges is when we talk about, and Vilma, you said this beautifully earlier as part of the intro, like we still in it, right? We're still seeing the impact from the pandemic. And so that was a word that we often found. Some of our efforts here were to support the Sacramento CoLab, which really focused on providing kind of immediate responsive support services to individuals and families most impacted by the pandemic. Now, whether that was physically, right, due to illness, that level of impact, loss of job, and all the other things that we know occurred. But some of those conversations we talked about, but where is the greatest need? Those communities that we were supporting they were most vulnerable, where there was already a deep need, right? We saw that heighten in times, right, fold in terms of the impact. So those conversations were necessary to say, no, we're talking about an equitable approach. We're trying to identify a need, address the need. And so I think those conversations, I think they've always been challenging, but I think much more so now, especially now, I think, especially when we talk about allocation of resources, right? We recognize that we want to support all of our young people, all of our families, and all of our communities, but we like to say that, some need that much more love. We need to show that much more love. And I think that's when we get into a conversation around equity and the inequities. So I think that sometimes is an ongoing challenge.
And it might be one, I mean, I like your description. It does seem that it is, a range of things. But what it puts me in the mind of is that in working with young people and people of color is like, it is in the context of their families. And you mentioned families is in the context of their community and in the context. So that all of these things, it seems that you're weaving them together because it's not just one thing. This is complex. And so you have to weave in, so you have to talk about, families, and you talk about, what's happening perhaps with Black boys. And then you weave in, whether it's medical, and then you take it back to, of course, finance, which for me, is kind of that whole power issues that come together. So I can understand, why you're dealing with so much. One of the things that I also like that it seems, and I know I may not know as much about your organization, but it also seems that you are working kind of interdisciplinary, but also across, like with other partners and collaborations and organizations, trying to create this kind of seamless kind of way of support, because there's a lot that's needed. So as you think about kind of this work, and I know that I have participated in a lot of work on the East Coast here, Cheryl Petty, and the work of elemental change. And it really is, they really talk about, how can the organizations support each other? Because of course, everybody, rather than see themselves as competitors. And that's always a positioning of competitors for the money, competitors for people, but there's so much work out there. So can you just talk a little bit about, the organizations that you work through, and how do you support that kind of beloved community of we all have to work together. And yes, we know that, sometimes it appears that it's a limited pie, but we have to work together so that we can increase the size of the pie.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm not sure, we know any other way. For me, culturally, and my own just core values and upbringing, like that's how we operate. We operate as community. We can't be in competition, and not, one person or one organization do it alone. So I agree with you when you say we can't be competitive with each other. Now, that's not to say folks are not competitive. We see it, we experience it. And unfortunately, we see the resultant impact of that. But that's not our way. What we know is to operate in community, consistently in the spirit of community, and identifying who are those other partners, regardless of kind of size, scope, or scale of their organizations. But how do we bring in, a closeness of a connective of community to be able to be of service back to the community, in which we're supporting. And that includes not just that working with, but alongside of. We say, look, we don't have the answers, we don't have the magic pill. But where that knowledge and wisdom does exist is within community. And so we always say we're just the facilitators of the discussion and the conversation. But we might be doing this work wrong if we're in service to community and we don't have community with us in helping to inform, shape, and design the specifics of our work and our work forward. But I would just say that I wholeheartedly agree. We have to involve others beyond us to be able to do this work well. And again, yeah, it's not something that I'm not sure I would even know how to operate that way. It's just not, in my heart or my spirit to be that way. But again, I recognize that some are, and we should, make note of who they are when we cross paths, because that makes the work difficult sometimes. We just have to be more mindful and more strategic.
And I also think people are looking for us to do that, just so that we end up that we're working at cross purposes rather than coming together in a collaborative community fashion. So yes, I think that's a strategy.
Oh, you're right. And I always say, look, don't, someone said this to us once, it's we keep this wall of inspiration. I know Dr. O has seen it. And they say, look, if you come into the table looking to be liked, you might be coming to the wrong table. But all that to say, it's okay to come, part of the work is having those difficult conversations, working with others who maybe we don't necessarily agree in the same approach of solutions. But that's where some of the real change, the movement building, the systems change, you're right, has to involve everyone, even if our core values don't necessarily align. But sometimes the most challenging work is the most necessary and difficult work.
Just a reminder to our audience, if anyone has a question, feel free to ask it in the Q&A tab or in the chat. I learned a long time ago, it's kind of the weirdest thing, but it's our summers get busy. Some folks they take a summer break. Our summer, we take breaks in the fall and winter and spring. Summer, it gets moving. But when you get ready to go into your busy season, and you're in a peculiar situation where you're doing heavy lifts for multiple organizations, you're really kind of being the backbone for these organizations as they take on challenges of their own. How are you practically finding rest and replenishment before, during, and after those high volume times where that you're just going to be getting it from a lot of different directions? Practically, what are you doing in those moments, or what have you seen done in those moments that allow for rest and replenishment?
Yeah, I think it's always a busy time, and you're right about summers. The summer fun. We love summer. We do wonderful work with the Children's Defense Fund through the Freedom Schools program. I think I mentioned this earlier, but when I think about replenishing and rest, I really do lean into the things that shaped me. A little bell growing up, and a lot of that were influential factors from my family, and just our own kind of core practices, the things that I continue to integrate and practice to this day. So much so, in fact, that then I think I may share this with you previously, Dr. O. Then we just recently established, it's a center, experiential kind of healing center called Centro Temascal, that really kind of is a space where we say offers a sense of calma and paz, so just calmness and peace. But all that say incorporates things such as, if you can see I don't want you to see because there's stacks of folders on my desk here, but I have like my wellness kind of healing center that incorporates things that bring me joy, things that either it's been a gift to me from someone that I care about or love, that I find healing in that. I always have a candle. I have rituals in my day, right? So I always have light. There's just practices that I integrate that I kind of describe as rituals, right? For me, that help me start my day, get me through my day, and help me end my day. The other is leaning into those that I trust most, my own kind of circle of community or village, those people that I love and uplift me when I needed support. And then likewise that maybe I support in their own moment. So I lean into those that I call not only my community, my village, but I always say the word familia for me, the Spanish word for family means something different. It's those closest to me, right? Those that support me. And then I'm fortunate enough to be able to support in return. I also, if, I'm time with my family, that's very protective time for me. That helps kind of replenish me. That brings me joy. It helps heal me. And then also I have a strong just level of spirituality and faith. And so I lean into that when I need to kind of replenish and to heal. And then I dedicate, you're right. I do take time off. It's in the winter when schools are out, when most are celebrating a winter break and or holidays. And that's a moment I just check out, and it's family time, and I dedicate that time. That's something that I schedule, I commit to. But all that to say, I really do love what I do, continuously being in service to community. And in that way, that replenishes me. I feel good about the work that we do, the work that I do and kind of give to the community. And that's something that's healing to me. So I incorporate and have just integrated kind of practices and rituals that support me. I lean into others that I trust and care about that support me in return when needed. And then I'm very committed to just blocking out and dedicating just time of rest and time with my family, which is healing to me in its own way. And then an opportunity to create space that's accessible for others within the community through Centro Temascal, to be able to enjoy and a lot of those indigenous practices that bring just a sense of calm and peace.
I'm glad you said that, because that I wanted to go into that a little bit more. When I first asked you the question, you started off with the indigenous piece, and you brought in the language, and leaned into the language and then translated it for us. Could you talk a little bit more about the importance of staying connected with your indigenous roots as part of this process?
Yeah, it's essential for me. I feel this is like my makeup, my being, and I'm thankful just to parents that embraced that and shared that. And I'll say, I identify as unapologetically Latina, Mexicana, Chicana, right? Which each kind of identify and connect to kind of my self-identity in different ways and have just carry different meanings. But it's just an aspect of who I am that, shapes and informs like how I come to this work and the work that I do. And so for me, again, those core values, including familia, faith, my spirituality, those are things that provide me a level of just being able to replenish and or healing. So I don't see them. It's not like I don't know. It's just it's my way of being, if that makes sense. It's just my way of being.
Vivian from the chat says, what about those without families? What advice or thoughts do you have for folks without families?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And I think, for me, that's why I use that word. Familia, for me, it's not just those that, are families in the traditional sense and the way that we may think about it as like blood, right? It's those that are trusted, I have some connection to, right? That provide a level of support, it can be in different ways. So it's a more broader term, right? It could be a friendship, it could be a colleague, but it's more of a broader term. And I think that that's where we lean into, right? Those that are trusted, we have some connection with, and that we cross paths with just folks that maybe are not a direct family, but are extension by way of the support that they offer, the way that they engage with us, they kind of look out for us. It could be various different things, but maybe not a direct in the traditional sense of the way we think of kind of family dynamic.
I like that, and also like your, as you shared with us, your kind of ritual in the morning. And I think people, ritual is very important because ritual, it has a grounding. It provides a way in which, you always come back to your center. And so to have, a place like the things that you love to see, that kind of you feel connected to. And it can be anything. It can be, photos or, a symbol and, rocks that you got at a certain, place, but things that are with your heart. And I think, a lot of us, we get busy. And so we, up, and yes, we have the routine of, brushing our teeth and doing whatever, but that ritual piece is important. And so I know that the question is in the chat, is like, what are your recommendations around how do people create that space, those kind of rituals, that connection with people when, we are led to believe that somehow it comes naturally, when I think we have to create it in many ways to nourish ourselves. And so if you do have recommendations, talk about that.
I think you're absolutely right. We are the creators. We are the designers of our own space. And what that looks like, I think is up to us, right? As the creators, as the designers of that. I think it's important to find the things that, again, bring us a sense of just joy, right? That puts us in a space of being just grounded and mindful in that moment. And those could be different things of how we create it in design space, and in particular where space, right? Physical space may be limited. So it doesn't, I think it's important to not define kind of that way of thought in terms of just the physical space. Sometimes it's just being in the moment. I have to say, just take a moment to just be and just ground ourselves in where that is, even if it's just taking time to just step outside, right? Especially in this world. And I appreciate it and I love it. This world of Zoom, it connects us. But it's also important to not only stay connected, but to find space to step outside, to be in that moment, to the things that we're hearing, the things that we're feeling, even the weather. I'm not sure the weather where you are right now, but it's raining. But even just the sound, water in itself is very healing. So being able to, I think, redefine how we think of space and be the creators of what that would look like, sound like, and the ways that we will connect with those different creation of spaces. I think that would be a key recommendation.
Well, thank you. And I see that Dr. DeJesus is with us, and we apologize. There was some mix up in times, but Dr. Olga DeJesus is an associate professor and assistant dean of teacher education with Marist College. And she's been an educator for more than 20 years in special education, bilingual education, language acquisition, and teacher preparation in higher ed. And she has 2 master's degree in elementary education as well as school administration, and also a doctorate in leadership, in educational leadership. And so I know that, you know, unfortunately, we don't have the kind of wisdom of your words, but we've been talking about rest, rejuvenation in this, and just wanted to invite you to the table to see if you had any words for our audience.
Good afternoon, Dr. Cobbs and colleagues joining us in this panel. Thank you so much for this lovely invitation, and I do apologize for the tardiness. We did get a little bit confused with the information, but I wanted to resonate a little bit about, I know I just joined in a little bit of the conversations that were being circulated and shared. Dr. Cobb, can you expand a little bit about the perspective that you would like me to bring related to what you've been discussing so far, so that I channel it correctly?
Right. We've been discussing, this whole series is around rest, rejuvenation, and replenishment. And so what we have been doing, I guess, and this is our third session, is really talking about how do we do that in different ways. And so we started the conversation really around a lot of things that's happened, especially with our young people. As you know, what has happened in Nashville recently. And then we circle back to, well, you know, stuff is still happening for the children that we work with, for us as adults. And I think each one of you, the perspective of having both of you is that you have been working kind of in the field around education, particularly around young people. I think our other speaker, Bel Rios, is really working a lot at the community level. You're in higher education. You've also worked for this New York State Department of Education. And so how have you really began to kind of embrace this notion of rest, recuperation, and replenishment around what you do with the people that you work with, especially for the populations that you work with?
Yes. So interestingly, that we're talking about this, and this is a very timely topic. We know that the incidents that have taken place as recently as this past week in Nashville, Tennessee, is really making us look into thinking about how do we support our students, whether they're at P to 12 or in higher education, in deal with some of the aftermath that a lot of the news impact has impacted our audience. And just this morning in one of my faculty meetings, I'm predominantly dealing with in higher ed, mostly undergraduate students. And in one of our faculty meetings, we were discussing about any possible identification of academic alerts of any candidate that is raising some concerns, and what are some of the supports that we can offer, right? And all that good stuff. And we know that we've always had, counseling hotlines, and we've had on campus supports to have someone available to talk to students if they've been impacted directly or indirectly by this most recent news that continues to become more popular than we would want to in our society across the nation. And one of the things that was shared by one of the faculty is that in her interaction with one of the candidates, the teaching candidate, this young girl had asked for permission to allow her to bring in knitting. She has taken up knitting, and knitting seems to be her source of releasing anxiety. And so when we think about students with special needs, right, we always think about accommodations, and we're thinking along the traditional trends of what those accommodations can possibly be. But then that information gained an open gate to a conversation of what are some of the different or non-traditional, we say, forms of accommodations that we're willing as educators to allow into our classroom to continue to support our candidates, not only from the academic standpoint, but also the social, emotional standpoint. And for some reason, for this young lady, she's taken on knitting, and she says that this helps her with anxiety. She knits before exams. She knits after the exams to kind of, while she waits for her results. So knitting has become a way for her to release. And we hear this also in communities where now more often when you're taking a flight somewhere or you're, on a train across states, you're seeing more and more passengers with animals, and they're calling these animals emotional support animals, right? And they're even giving special tags. And so we're recognizing that this is no longer a use for the visually impaired individuals, right? They're not usually used for the hearing impaired individuals or with the more physical disabilities, but we're seeing it more and more as a trend that individuals are resorting to some sort of animal or thing or hobby to kind of let out some of those anxieties, some of those stresses and things like that. And so even on campus, we're now seeing, and I'm now in a more traditional undergrad campus where the students dorm and they're walking around throughout the day. And so you can appreciate what are some of the visual things that they're adapting to kind of release some of that stress. And so the faculty were talking, how much of this should be allowed? How much into the classroom? How much of this is it being recognized by our offices of accommodations and accessibility? And how much of it are we recognizing it to be different than what we were used to in the past? So back then when we were working with younger children, we would refer to those as security blankets, right? There was always in the early childhood, those children who would want to have that blankie or that binky or, that stuffed animal that provided some sense of security. Well, it's a reality, folks. We're seeing this even in higher education. And so that brings us to a trend of thought that goes beyond social expectations, that goes beyond the things that we've already have identified in the past as being support, but then talking and translating that into what are the curriculum changes that we now have to implement to kind of continue to support those social emotional needs that affect directly or indirectly the academic portion, because that's where we really have a little bit more of a leeway and kind of responsibility. The academic, how is this young lady that has taken up this knitting as a form of releasing her anxiety, how can we reconnect her to the academics beyond that? Now, I don't know much about knitting, but I know that there's a pattern process to it that can probably be equated to mathematics concept. I know that there's shapes that go around it that maybe we can relate it to. And so then I got into a conversation with the math professor and said, okay, how can we now think about an activity where we can incorporate this, not only where the student or this particular candidate is benefiting from this relaxation activity, but that it can be a group share activity within her classroom along with her peers and incorporate some of the mathematical, scientific. So we're now thinking outside of the box, right? And rethinking our curriculum. And that's just on the train of social emotional connections to content. If we take it from a linguistic or culturally responsive route, that's a total different conversation that we may have. But that's just a very quick example of how we are as a society are very much in need to identify relaxation techniques, to identify how as educators we can incorporate things in the early childhood. Sometimes that meant time out, right? There's just pause, freeze, stop, those kind of techniques to kind of help the children to kind of like stop whatever mechanism of anxiety they're experiencing, take a breather, relax, and then be able to regroup to move on to the next exercise or activity, right? We're seeing more and more needs for that. And that's just a little bit of an insight of what I'm talking about. As an educator and as an adult myself, what are some techniques that I now, when I go home, utilize to relax myself from all the day's activities and stresses, and especially as an administrator, right? We bear a little bit more responsibility and anxiety at a total different level at this stage of the game, right? Well, I'll share. I'm empty nested, and I most recently brought in a new member to the family, and it's a dwarf bunny. And so my husband said, we're done with the kid. We're our last family dog passed away 2 years. Now we can pick up our bags and go. And I said, no, I need something for me. And so I wanted this dwarf bunny, and I finally got it. And when I come home, I take a few minutes after dinner, family time, whatever, and I just cuddle with this bunny, and it just distresses me. There's a joy around the innocence of this little animal that just puts me in a different mindset, in a different state of mind, and just just really gets me ready for my evening, calling out it a day. And it could be an animal, it could be knitting, it could be a hobby, it could be a walk in the park. But as educators, we are too in need of that time to ourselves to be able to identify what brings me joy. And for me, that cute little bunny is what really brings me joy. You know, my husband, on the other hand, is a little bit jealous of the bunny now, and so I have another problem. But it's a joy. It's something. There's always something that brings us joy, and the important thing is to identify those things and be able to do and make time in our lives for it more and more.
Well, I see that Andrea in the chat, she's put and she's talked about some of the recent research that's out there, especially around the mental health, especially among Latina, Hispanic communities. And so she asked the question, how do we play a role in creating culturally competent mental health care? And I would say that's true. And so I put this question out in closing to both of you as we begin to come to a close. How do we create that kind of culturally competent supported mental health? And I know, Belle, that you had mentioned, I think you have a center designated around, familiar around that. And so perhaps as you bring your closing comments, you can talk about that.
No, thank you for that. Yes, and I would lean into during the peak of the pandemic, we worked with a lot of the health providers and bridging kind of their relationship and conversations with community. And so as we think about that question that was posed, I think a lot of our conversations, and we think about kind of the how and the way that we do, if it's about community and service to community, then it has to be with community. And so I would say, as we think about informing even, the healthcare providers, the medical fields, I would just say that those conversations have to be with, to be most responsive and most relevant to those specific needs, particularly when we think about the Latino community.
Olga?
Yes, and I just wanted to add that I'm glad that this question was shared, because often in the Latino community, if it's culturally attributed or not, there's this expectation, especially around Latina women, where we're the homemakers, we keep things together, we keep things running. And so there's this set of expectation that's very different, gender related. And so less and less, we give ourselves the acceptance of saying, I need a break. Mom doesn't get a break. Wife doesn't get a break. That notion of I need a break and I'm entitled to a break and I deserve a break is something that culturally is not embedded in us. And so with all the afflictions that society, especially around mental health issues, that are being charged with, we need as a community to empower Latina women to say, it's okay to take a breather and step back and say, I need a break. If you're feeling overwhelmed with the children, if you're feeling overwhelmed in the relationship, you're feeling overwhelmed with work, family, children, and all the other stuff that a lot of us deal with, right? That it's okay to own a space and time and say, I have to take this space and time. And I think that we need to continue to express that there should be a sense of entitlement to take that moment of space and time for self.
And I agree with that. And thank you, Rosella, because I would agree that we may feel that as, Latino women. I know that Black women sometimes feel the same way, but Asian, I think we all sometimes that in terms of that gender cultural piece, the thinking we have to be strong, we have to push on, we have to, kind of work our way through it. So we push through rather than stepping back and just saying, let's take some time for ourselves. So thank you both. I really appreciate this. And I think this has been another dynamic conversation. And Ijeoma, I'm going to turn it over for you for your final word. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you both sharing your wisdom and your your insights with us. It really has been special. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage folks to tap in for our next conversation. These conversations are just going to continue to get better and better. We have Dr. Raquel Holmes, founder and director of Improv Science, who is going to be talking with us about health sciences and some of the work that she is doing around this topic. So until April 12th, I will see you all next time.
Thank you.